are recording, and I'll make that the first announcement. So what we are trying to do, and what the plan is right now, is to have Tristan record them. He will record and save it, and then we are going to try to post this to a YouTube channel that I run. We'll do it maybe tomorrow or over the weekend to make sure it works and see what it looks like. If it is successful, then all of the lectures that we're doing on Zoom will be available to public. You don't need any link. You don't need me to say something. You can go to YouTube. You can go to Dundee State University. And Tristan, we can make a little page for these. Is that right?
What do you mean by page?
Well, a little area where we just put these.
Yeah, we can make a playlist for it.
Okay, perfect. So we will try to do that to make all the lectures, the recorded lectures, available for anybody who wants to go back to see them. So give us, let's get through this lecture. Let's try to get them up, and then we'll see how it goes, and we'll have more announcements next week. Okay. All right, 36. Okay, so that's the first announcement. The second announcement, let me just remind you that the exam is due 2 weeks from today, April 9th. Okay, you already have the question. You can be working on the question right now. It will say everything still applies. Don't exceed the maximum number I put on it, and type it and send it to me at my nicholas.dungy@csun email address by 3 o'clock next 2 weeks from today on Thursday. Everybody okay with that? Everybody understands that? Yeah, fabulous. Okay, now related to the whole issue of exams and reading. So you are responsible for Nietzsche's Preface and the first essay. We're going to do the preface today, and then we're going to have 2 lectures to move through the first essay. So we've got plenty of time. We're going to have a good pace. We don't have to rush through anything. So don't worry. We have 3 more lectures before the midterm. We're going to do the preface today. We're going to get deep into some Nietzschean themes that he's going to talk about and develop in the first essay. And then we're going to have 2 full Zoom video classes to do the first essay. So we're going to be able to walk right through all of Nietzsche's arguments. Now, in addition, you have my lecture notes that I sent for you. You have my lecture notes for the preface, and most importantly, you have my lecture notes for the first essay. So you will be able to follow along in the lecture notes, this discussion we're having in the Zoom classes. And if there's anything that moves by, or I don't speak about something well or eloquently, you have my lecture notes, and my lecture notes tell the whole story. You just kind of follow the lecture notes through each principal idea, what it means and why it's important. So you guys should be in really great shape for the midterm. You've got all the lectures we had before we went to Zoom. You're going to have the Zoom and the Zoom recorded lectures, and you have my lecture notes to supplement your reading and to supplement the videos. So by the time we get to the midterm, you guys should have really be in great shape and armed with very deep resources, not only to understand the material, but then to convey it. Because as I said last time, we're not going to be defeated by this. We're not going to get punched around by this. We're going to pivot, we're going to adapt, and we're going to thrive. No giving up. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I need one of you to officially be the yes person or the okay. All right. So what is the agenda for today? The agenda for today is to discuss Nietzsche's Preface, and in discussing Nietzsche's Preface, get very deep into an engagement with what Nietzsche wants to do, with the intensity of his ideas and the power of his ideas. The preface does a very good job of that and kind of opens up who Nietzsche is and prepares us for what we are going to see in the first essay. Now, as a way of kind of framing this, and if you have your introduction, your Nietzsche's Preface to the Genealogy of Morals outline, if you have that outline with you, or you can open it up, in an attempt to kind of contextualize this and move into Nietzsche, to transition from Mill and move into Nietzsche and move into the preface of the Genealogy of Morals. Let's think about the preface in a kind of a poetic and a playful way. Let's think about the preface as Nietzsche's way of announcing and introducing to us the three main animating ideas of postmodernism. In the preface, we will see Nietzsche in very powerful way provide his way of thinking, his way of articulating, his way of introducing us to what he thinks are the three most important elements of postmodern thought, to the three most important elements of his thinking. And I, at the risk of boring you, again, postmodern thinking, Nietzsche's thinking, postmodern thinking is animated by three major ideas. One, a suspicion about the existence of a metaphysical or moral truth. Two, a concern about the effects, the consequences to our minds, our souls, our bodies, and our politics that result from our belief in and commitment to that moral truth. And three, if we can get through the first two, if we can become aware of the way in which our belief in and commitment to certain ideas of moral metaphysics, if we can become aware of the way those ideas have not produced optimum outcomes in our consciousness, have produced a kind of depression, a kind of resentment, a life-hating, a kind of nihilism. If we can start to see that, then three, the third animating energy of postmodern thought, of aesthetic theory in general, can we begin to disentangle ourselves from those ideas? That, by the way, is what Nietzsche's going to mean by freedom. And in the process of disentangling, can we learn how to become the type of people, the types of person that find the emotional strength and the intellectual creativity to give meaning and value and purpose to our own lives, to do kind of live in Nietzsche's postmodern aristocratic way, or from the tragedy class, what he would call the heroic perspective. So I want to frame the preface, kind of how we structure and move into the preface around those three animating ideas of postmodernism. In Nietzsche's preface, we see each one of those ideas discussed and illuminated in a very poetic, a very powerful way. Okay, so as I write in the introduction, in the outline to Nietzsche's preface in the Genealogy of Morals declares in a powerfully poetic way the animating themes of postmodernism, those three animating themes. So let's get into it. Let's get into the preface, and let's identify each one of those themes, and let's unpack what Nietzsche means by them and why he thinks he's important. So Nietzsche's preface on the Genealogy of Morals opens with a profound statement, perhaps one of the most profound statements that begins postmodern political philosophy, that begins Nietzsche's thought, and serves as a challenge to 2,000 years of philosophical, religious, and scientific metaphysics. Nietzsche opens the preface of the Genealogy of Morals with this extraordinary challenge to 2,000 years of metaphysical thinking. And Nietzsche says, as in the first line of the preface, "We are unknown to ourselves, we men of knowledge, and with good reason. We have never sought ourselves. How could it happen that we could find ourselves?" So immediately, in addition to the sort of extraordinary things in a broader sense that are happening with this statement, immediately we see Nietzsche challenging 2,000 years of metaphysics And we see in the more immediate context of this class, we see Nietzsche challenge immediately John Stuart Mill, right? Nietzsche is saying in the opening line, we are unknown to ourselves, we men of knowledge. And when he says we men, we human beings of knowledge, right? When he says we, us human beings of knowledge, he means specifically the human beings that have spent 2,000 years in some sort of philosophical, religious, or scientific quest for the truth. We men of knowledge, philosophical knowledge, religious knowledge, scientific knowledge, we human beings who have spent 2,000 years looking for the truth of justice, looking for the truth of God, looking for the truth of the healthy, and we human beings who have spent that time looking for those things in the hope that the knowledge of that truth, that philosophical truth, that moral, that religious truth, that scientific truth would somehow be good for us, that it would somehow elevate our consciousness, help us to learn to live well, live correctly, live righteously, live in a healthy way. And Nietzsche opens up perhaps one of his most famous books ever. And he says, look, that quest has been a failure. That quest itself is part of the problem. We have spent 2,000 years searching for ourselves, searching for knowledge of who the hell we are and how we ought to live well. And at the end of that 2,000 years, at the end of that journey, we are strangers to ourselves. And by the way, it's more dramatic, as we will find when we get into the next idea. It's not just that we're strangers to ourselves. We have misunderstood ourselves. We have raised the question of who the hell we are and what it means to be the creators of meaning, to be the creators of value, to be the creators of purpose. We fundamentally misunderstood that. And in misunderstanding that and going deeper and deeper into this metaphysical quest, we've become estranged from ourselves. We don't understand ourselves. We've become estranged ourselves. And not only have we become estranged from ourselves, but we've become life-hating. We've become nihilistic. We've become weak. We've become meek. We've become life-hating. We've become resentful. We've become self-hating. And so Nietzsche begins the book. We are unknown to ourselves, we men of knowledge. And he says, and with good reason. And with good reason. We have never sought ourselves. We have been misdirected, misguided in a metaphysical search for something true that doesn't exist. He says, we have never sought ourselves. How could it happen that we should ever find ourselves? So on the bottom of section 1 of the preface, he says, so we are necessarily strangers to ourselves. We do not comprehend ourselves. We have to misunderstand ourselves. For us, the law, quote, each is furthest from himself, applies to all eternally. We are not men of knowledge with respect to ourselves. Okay. There is the sledgehammer of postmodernity taking the first whack at 2,000 years of some form of metaphysical thinking that has a moral orientation. We are unknown to ourselves. We men of knowledge don't know who the fuck we are. And not only do we not know who we are, but our search for the truth of who we are has rendered us nihilistic and resentful and self-hating and petty and weak. So in the first sentence of the preface, Nietzsche announces in this extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily dramatic, extraordinarily poetic way the first of the animating themes of postmodernism, a suspicion about the existence of truth. In Nietzsche's poetic phrase, we are unknown to ourselves, we human beings, we men of knowledge. He is raising this question. I am suspicious about the existence of this metaphysical truth. 2,000 years of its search, of its quest, of its commitment, hundreds of years of bloodshed spilt in its search, and we are strangers to ourselves. We do not know who we are. We have no knowledge of who the hell we are. We have no knowledge of the fact that we are the meaning and the value and the purpose-giving creatures. And so this announces the first of these themes. Nietzsche and postmodern theory is suspicious about the existence of a metaphysical truth with a moral orientation.
Professor, I have a question.
Yep.
So having read just this first section, is it that whatever Mill said was good for us, Nietzsche believes is actually harming us?
Yeah, beautiful. There's no question about this. So, and I tried to slip Mill in here a little bit. And if you go back to those transition remarks that I typed up and sent for you guys, some of this story is in there. Nietzsche is, first of all, Nietzsche is going to argue quite directly that Mill's notion of moral agency and Mill's account of the type of freedom that we activate in search of it, right? Nietzsche's going to argue, one, I'm very suspicious about the existence of that objective truth, and two, the whole concept of freedom deployed to pursue it actually makes you a stranger to yourself, right? We are unknown to ourselves. And Nietzsche's kind of laughing in this sardonic, almost ironical sort of way. And he's going to say to JSML, look, the very thing that the very truths that you posited, this moral agency, this rational progressive truth, this moral agency, the very truths that you have posited as the cornerstone of metaphysics, and the very account of freedom that you have articulated and asked us to mobilize and actualize in the pursuit of this knowledge, of this truth. Not only has that not done what it was supposed to do, it's in fact, one, it's made us quite lost, and two, it's made us quite sick. The very account of moral agency and the very account of freedom that Mill has articulated in On Liberty has for Nietzsche produced exactly the opposite of what Mill wanted. It's made us first strangers to ourselves, but again, just the being strangers to ourselves that's bad, to be sure, but that's not really the issue here. It's not just that we are strangers to ourselves. We don't understand ourselves. We are very, very, very far from understanding ourselves. And in fact, we're not only are we very far from understanding ourselves, but the understanding that we do have of ourselves, that we derive from this Platonic quest for truth, this Christian quest for the moral life, this enlightenment, normative, social, and behavioral and medical science quest for the healthy mind, the healthy body, the healthy sexuality, the normal life. That quest has had extraordinarily negative consequences to our minds and our bodies and our politics. And that segues into the second animating theme of postmodernism. It's not just that Nietzsche is suspicious about the existence of the truth. It's not just that he's saying, I'm suspicious of the truth. That quest for the truth has made us strangers to ourselves. He's not just saying that. He's saying, in addition to that, what are the consequences to our minds and our bodies and our politics that have resulted from our belief in that truth, from our commitment to that truth? And this brings us, if I may, now segue into the second theme. This brings us to the second theme. Nietzsche raises, and again in an extraordinarily dramatic way, he raises the question in the preface. Not only are we strangers to ourselves, but what is the value of our highest values? Right? He raises this question as a way of segueing into the second theme. He writes on page 17, under what conditions did human beings devise these value judgments, good and evil? And what value do they themselves possess? Have they hindered or furthered human well-being? And that's Nietzsche's way of, again, raising the second theme, that animating theme of postmodernism. Again, at the risk of boring the hell out of you. What are, to our minds, our bodies, and our politics that result from our belief in the moral truth, our commitment to it? In Nietzsche's language, what is the value of our highest values? And we'll get into this more directly in a few minutes. But we, as the heirs of some sort of metaphysical system, a philosophical metaphysics, a religious metaphysics, a scientific metaphysics, for 2,000 years, we have taken the value of our highest values for granted. Ever since Plato, it has just been assumed, it has been taken for granted that Socrates is the good person. No one has questioned the value of being Socrates. For 2,000 years, people have just taken it for granted that the image, the archetype of the good person is Jesus or Mother Teresa, and that the value of being like Jesus, like Mother Teresa, is just true. It's obvious. With the advent of the emergence of the normative social, behavioral, and medical sciences, now the archetype of the good person is the rational scientist, the rational political scientist who acquires this knowledge about the intimate and minute functionings of human beings and politics, and they acquire that knowledge and they apply it to their own bodies and their minds. They apply it to the social engineering of the community in the helps of improving the community. And nobody questions the value of that. We take for granted the value of our highest values. And Nietzsche opens postmodernism. Nietzsche becomes Nietzsche in the raising of the question. What is the value of our highest values? Do we even have the emotional courage, the intellectual creativity to even question these values? Is it possible, Nietzsche says, that our belief in and a commitment to our highest values is the source of our nihilism? Is it possible that our belief in and commitment to our highest values is precisely nihilism? Weariness, life, despondency. And this becomes one of the critical ideas driving the preface, driving the first essay. And so he goes on. 17. Under what conditions did human beings devise these value judgments, good and evil? Now, can I pause here for a second and slide something in? Thank you. If there is a thesis to the book, I'm speaking now about the book as a whole, the genealogy of morals. If there is a thesis that governs the book, if you had to sort of attach a kind of academic thesis that governs the book, what's the book supposed to do? What does Nietzsche want to do in the book? You can think of it in this way. Nietzsche writes the book, and it's right in the title. It's titled The Genealogy of Morals. Nietzsche's purpose in the book is to do two things. One, he wants to identify the origin, the real origin, historical and kind of analytical, theoretical origin of the term good, and how the original notion of good and bad became distinguished and what they meant. And then he wants to tell the story, and we're going to get deep into this. We'll talk about it a little bit here, but we're going to get. Then he wants to tell the story. How did the original definition, understanding, assertion of the idea good, and the original dichotomy or juxtaposition between the idea good and bad, how did those original definitions and distinctions, how did they become transformed? Nietzsche's word will be transvalued. How did they become transformed into the new definition of good and evil, and the new juxtaposition between good and evil, right? And for Nietzsche, that is the story of metaphysics. So Nietzsche is going to identify the historical origin of the meaning of good and bad, what it meant, how it operated, and then he's going to identify the moment in Western history where the original ideas, good and bad, and the distinction between them become changed, Nietzsche's word is transvalued. Our word would be changed or transformed. How does the original meaning of good and bad and what that meant and how it operated, how did those meanings and transferred to the notion of good and evil that we are now familiar with? And to argue that moment in human begins with Plato. That is the emergence of metaphysics in Western civilization. Okay, so that's the project of the book, right? And so when Nietzsche says, when he opens up the preface and he says, we are unknown to ourselves, we men of knowledge, right? First of all, when he says we men of knowledge, he's talking about, as we suggested earlier, you and I as the sort of narrators of some sort of metaphysical system of thought. The quest for knowledge begins in philosophy. The quest for knowledge begins in religion. The quest for knowledge, obviously, enlightenment, normative, social, and behavioral sciences, right? And it's at that moment that the original distinction between good and bad and what it meant gets transvalued into the notion of good we understand now, and its juxtaposition, or that's the moment in history that happens. And by the way, next week when we get into the first essay, we'll tell that story. In the lecture notes that I prepared and sent for you, you can read that story. So Nietzsche moves to the second theme of postmodernism. What are from our belief in and commitment to moral truth. Deeper idea by raising the question in the preface. Man divides these value judgments, good and evil. And what value do they themselves possess? A different, slightly different angle, perhaps, to clarify it, right? As earlier, as we were moving into this, for 2,000 years, the archetype, the image, the model of the good person has the philosopher, Socrates, the man who spent his life searching for and acquiring knowledge. Purpose of that knowledge, as he said to Crito as in the hours before he was to die, is to live well, to moral life. Later on, New Testament Christianity and Islam take over this archetype. Now the archetype is less Socrates, it's less Aristotle, it's less the philosopher, and now it's the priest, now it's the prophet, now it's the religious person, now it's Mother Teresa. Jesus becomes the archetype for the good person. The values of Jesus, serving others, weakness, self-abstinence, those become the values of a good person. Becomes the archetype for the good person. Later on, now our madness, and in the other class we'll read Foucault. This is what makes Foucault famous. Our madness is now with the doctor. It's with the professor, it's with the social worker, it's with the scientist. It's with all these people who have acquired knowledge about how your mind works, how your body works, how your sexuality ought to work, how you ought to raise your kids, right? Those are the archetypes of the good people and the values that they tell us about how to live well. For 2,000 years, we have assumed were true. We have taken for granted that Socrates is the image of the good person, that Dr. Dungy is the image of the good person, or the psychiatrist is the image of the good person, that prophets, that these are the archetypes of the good person. And we've assumed that their values elevate our lives, that they make us emotionally strong, that they make us intellectually creative, that they liberate us rather than causing resentment and fear and nihilism and pettiness and self-pity. That's our history. And Nietzsche comes along, and as we will see more directly in the first essay, he says, you men of knowledge, not only are you strangers to yourselves, but you're not even very smart. I'm using that word playfully. You don't even understand the origin. He was going to say this is the essence of the first essay. You don't even understand the essay of the origin of the most important terms in your language, good and evil. You think the origin and the meaning and the value of the term good originates with Socrates. You think it originates or gets sort of deepened by New Testament Christianity. You think it takes on this sort of scientific biomedical dimension in Enlightenment science. You don't even understand the origin of the most important ideas that govern your life, because there's a whole other origin of the idea of good and bad that you've just ignored. So you're not even really a person of knowledge. You're kind of stupid. You don't even do honest history, Nietzsche will say. So he announces this moment. Under what conditions did human beings devise these value judgments, good and evil? And what value do they themselves possess? Have they hitherto hindered or furthered human progress? morality, is Christian morality, is the obsession of science with health? Are these a sign, as Nietzsche will say, of a kind of distress, kind of sickness, of impoverishment of the spirit, of the degeneration? Or is there revealed in them, on the contrary, the plenitude, the force of to mean and describe and assert a future, right? And that becomes page 19, deepening this theme. Under what conditions did these values emerge? What's the value of our highest values? Why in the hell do we not begin in an existentially honest and intellectually creative question of the value of our highest values? Section 5, page 19. 5 lines down, he writes, what was at stake was the value of morality. This is the opening of postmodernism. This is the opening of Nietzsche. And we don't have to put it in the past tense. We can put it in the present tense. What is at stake right now for you and I is the value of our highest values. And whether we have the courage, one, to ask the question, and the deeper courage and intellectual openness for the answer. And then the capacity to move beyond what we learn and to create something new, to become something new. What was at stake was the value of morality. 2 lines down. And now he goes directly to a questioning of the values of our highest values. What was especially at stake for him, he says, for me? What was especially the issue, the real issue, the issue of life itself, the most important existential issue? What was especially at stake, Nietzsche writes, was the value of the unegoistic. The instincts of pity, self-abnegation, self-sacrifice, which Schopenhauer or other metaphysicians, or Plato, or Christ, or the scientists, which Schopenhauer had gilded, had deified, and projected into a beyond for so long that at last they simply became value in itself, on the basis of which he said no to life and no to himself. So as I mentioned earlier, when Nietzsche raises the question, what is the value of our highest values? Specifically, he is speaking to the values that are in one way or another associated with some metaphysical morality. So we will talk about this more in the first essay, and I included a brief exchange about this in the lecture notes I sent you. But if you wanted to have a very quick example to get your head around, and it's useful to bring it up in this class because we've talked about this in different ways so far in the semester. At various moments in the semester, we've had an opportunity to talk about the famous discussion between Thrasymachus and Socrates in Book 1 of the Republic. And they're talking about justice. They're talking about the highest of human values, right? And Thrasymachus had said, justice is the advantage of the stronger, by which he meant those who invent meaning, those who make the laws is what he technically meant. Those who make the laws in their own interest, in their own image, to express their own meaning and their own value and their own purpose. That's what he meant at a very deep level. Justice is the advantage of the strong. The strong are those who are capable of inventing meaning, creating meaning, asserting their meaning and their value and their purpose as an assertion of power, as what Nietzsche will later call the will to power expressing itself, giving one's life, giving the world meaning, value, and beauty and significance. And Thrasymachus has said, justice, that's what is good. The original good comes from those people. That's the origin. Justice, or what is good, is finding the emotional strength and the creative ability to give one's life meaning, to give it value, to give it purpose. And Socrates, and this is the great debate that makes metaphysics and moral metaphysics possible. Socrates says, no, that's not right. That's not right, Thrasymachus. That's not the good. That's not what good means. That's not what justice means. Socrates says that you think about good in the wrong way. The good person isn't the one who asserts meaning. The good person is like the doctor or the pilot who acquires this knowledge and uses this knowledge to serve others. Right? And as Socrates famously said, something that New Testament Christianity, when in its own way, would say in the same way, that the good person, the just person, is someone who serves others. Right? As Socrates says, justice is serving others. It's serving is done for the weak. It's done for the benefit of others, Socrates famously said. And this is the origin of Western culture. Begins with Socrates. It's perfected in New Testament Christianity. We even now see it in the therapeutic sciences of the Enlightenment. The good person is one who takes his or her knowledge of truth and moral truth, and in a kind of, what's the right word? Gives it to others, serves others. And Nietzsche is talking about exactly this moment. What, going back to page 19, section 5, middle of section 5, what was especially at stake, Nietzsche says? Nietzsche says, I'm interested in the value of my highest value as an ostensibly good person in the 1870s. You and I should question the value of our highest values of the heirs of Enlightenment metaphysics. And we say to ourselves, well, what is our highest value? What's its history? And in one way or another, if we look at that history, we say, oh, the highest value of our metaphysical tradition. And you find it in Plato, you find it in New Testament Christianity, you find it even in the ideas that as a professor, I'm here to serve you. I've forsaken wealth, I've forsaken power, I've forsaken glory, I've forsaken all the attributes of what my genius should give to me. And I've forsaken all of them in this unegoistic purpose to serve you, to come and teach you, to serve you, to make sure your consciousness is enlightened, your consciousness is empowered. And I do it for little pay. I do it for no money. All of you forget within a week what I say. And Nietzsche is saying, if you look at the history of Western culture from Plato, its dominant value, its highest value is somehow caught up in the unegoistic. The good person is the humble person. The good person is the unegoistic person. The good person is a person that serves others. And Nietzsche says, what was especially at stake for me, he writes, was the value of the unegoistic, the instincts of pity, self-abnegation, self-sacrifice, which some form of moral metaphysics had gilded, had deified, had projected into a beyond, into this. It projected it into this metaphysical truth for so long that at last these values became value in themselves. They're true, they're metaphysically true. No one questions the value. No one questions the idea that Socrates is the good person. No one questions the idea that Mother Teresa is a good person. No one questions the idea that the self-sacrificing professor or therapist is the good person. We just take it for granted. But in making that our highest value, Nietzsche says, have we said no to life? And have we rendered ourselves unable to live? Have we rendered ourselves unknown to ourselves? Is this why we are strangers to ourselves? 3 lines down, still in section 5. And it was precisely here, Nietzsche writes, it was precisely here, he writes, that I saw the great danger to human beings. The most sublime enticement and seduction. Seduction to what? To nothingness. It was precisely here that I saw the beginning of the end, the dead stop, a retrospective weariness, the will turning against life, the tender and sorrowful signs of the ultimate illness. I understood the ever of pity and the unegoistic value that had seized even on philosophers and made them ill as the most sinister symptom of a European culture that had itself become sinister, perhaps as its bypass to a new Buddhism, as its movement towards nihilism. So there you go. The second animating theme of postmodernism. What are the consequences to our minds and our bodies and politics of our belief in and our commitment to some type of metaphysics and some type of metaphysics with a moral orientation? What is the value of our highest values? Page 20, middle of the page. One, Nietzsche writes, one has taken these values, one has taken the value of these values as given, as factual, as beyond all question. One has never doubted or hesitated in the slightest degree in supposing the good man to be of greater value than the evil man, or of greater value in the sense of furthering the advancement of history and prosperity in man in general. And then he pushes it even further. He says, but what? He says, but what if the reverse were true? What if a symptom of regression were inherent in the good person? Likewise, a danger, a seduction, a poison, a narcotic through which the present was possibly living at the expense of the future. And then he says 2 lines down, what if, he says, what if not only are we strangers, or what if we are strangers to ourselves, but what if we are sick? And what if the reason that we are strangers to ourselves and we're emotionally and mentally and physically sick, what if the reason for that happened to be the value of our highest values? What if it was the case that our morality was making us sick. And he says on the bottom of the page, what? So that precisely morality what if, he says, precisely if morality would be to blame, if the highest power and the highest splendor actually possible to human beings was never achieved. So that precisely what? So that precisely morality was the danger of all dangers. What if morality was the danger? What if morality was the reason we are strangers to ourselves? We men of knowledge are unknown to ourselves, and not just unknown to ourselves, but we have taken for granted the value of a type of value that has made us sick, made us life-hating. What if precisely morality was the danger of all dangers? So there we go. So far, we have talked about the first two of the animating themes of postmodernism. Nietzsche is suspicious of the existence of an objective truth, and especially a truth that has a moral orientation. So he raises this question, or it's not even a question, he asserts this point. We are unknown to ourselves. We men of knowledge, we people of knowledge, we don't know who the fuck we are. How can that possibly be? And not only are we strangers to ourselves, but what is the value of our highest value? What has it done for us? What culture? How has it prepared us? How has it prepared us for this moment in our own time? Actually, is the better question. And Nietzsche's answer to that is that the value of our highest values, and this is going to be some of the important work we do in the first essay next week. So first of all, the consequence to our minds and our bodies and our politics of our highest values is what Nietzsche calls the slave morality. Our highest values have produced what Nietzsche calls the slave morality. And we will talk about that more deeply next week, but that's the answer. The result is that we're not emotionally strong. We're not intellectually free and creative. We literally have a kind of slave morality. We have an unegoistic, serving, humble, meek, turn the other cheek ethic. And as we will see, I don't want to get into it now because we have to set up the argument, but as we will see when we get into book one, even that ethic, Nietzsche will say, the ethic of the unegoistic is itself born out of this extraordinary hatred. Again, we'll talk about that next week. All right, so turning to the third theme. If we can become aware and suspicious about the existence of an objective truth and some moral orientation, if we can raise the question of the value of our highest values, and if we can acknowledge, even if it's for the purposes of an experiment, we can acknowledge that it has created the slave morality, then what the hell can we do? What's the third animating feature of postmodern thought? And that is to learn how to begin the process of doing two things. One, first, of disentangling ourselves. Can we identify those ideas in our heads, the content of the value of our highest values that is producing a kind of sickness in us? One, can we identify those ideas? Can we identify what they're doing? Nietzsche just did it for us. Can we understand their source, and can we begin the process of trying to disentangle ourselves from it? And in some ways, Nietzsche and Mill have the same project here. Obviously, ultimately, Nietzsche is going to argue that the self is created, whereas Mill is going to argue it's discovered. But both Mill and Nietzsche agree at this point. In order to become free, you and I need to start disengaging ourselves from what Mill called the voices in our head and what Nietzsche calls the slave morality, this unquestioning acceptance that the value of our highest values is good. And so Nietzsche says we've got to begin this process of disentangling ourselves. We've got to take a sledgehammer to metaphysics. We've got to become free. And free, not just in a personal way, that's kind of not so much the important part. In a kind of physical free to move and do, and not just in a political way, but spiritually free. We've got to be free of resentment. We have to be able to look at life and our lives and the suffering and the joys and everything that happens. And we have to be able to look at it and not say, why me? That's unjust. It's unfair. Why me? To not become resentful under the conditions of life, but to remain affirmative and joyous in the living of life. How do we do that? Even now. And by the way, this is a great moment. This is as horrific as the suffering that is unfolding around all of us now is. It's fucking real. Of course it's real. It's not something you're imagining. The pain, the fear, the anxiety, that brooding awareness that all of this fucking shit that we thought was so real was an illusion and it's about to disappear. The abyss, you hear the abyss. What you hear in the silence is the abyss. It's the nothingness. And that's terrifying. As Herodotus famously said, as Nietzsche liked to quote Herodotus, of all the bitter things in life, the most bitter is this: to have consciousness and awareness of so much and control of so little. And when Herodotus said to have consciousness or to be aware of so much, what he meant, and when you unpack that, is to have human consciousness. To be aware means to have meaning, to create meaning, to assign meaning to the people we love, the friendships we build, the empires we build, the things that we do that have meaning. And in that meaning, the associated affectation, the love attached to all of this is real, and you have to do it, of course. So the pain and the anxiety and the fear that everybody is feeling right now is absolutely real. If you're not feeling anxious, if you're not feeling pain, if you're not terrified by a brooding omnipresence of suffering that is coming, you're a sociopath. Something's wrong with you. However, the whole purpose of thinking for Nietzsche, the whole purpose of freedom for Nietzsche, the whole existential responsibility to give meaning, to give value, and to give purpose is precisely to prepare you and I for times like this. This is the purpose of education. It is to prepare us, one, to know that these things are illusions, that these things can end, they can collapse, that suffering and tragedy can come. Often we don't see it coming, and often there's nothing we can do about it. But make no question about it, those things don't cripple you. They don't cripple us. They harm, they wound, they decenter, terrify. It's true. But you and I are prepared to resist this. In fact, we have to. And to resist it energetically and intensely, even erotically. And you do this first by not letting these things cripple you, by not giving up. by not feeling sorry for yourself, by not asking why me. First, don't be crippled. Don't let it control your soul. Don't let it buckle your knees. Know who the hell you are. Because in and through this crisis, you are going to find the emotional strength and you're going to find the intellectual creativity. One, you're going to find the emotional strength to survive it. And then you're going to find the creative, the poetic, the aesthetic, the creative, the intellectual style to redefine meaning, to reapply value, to imagine new purposes, to create new purposes. You have to. And you will do that despite the abyss, despite the nothingness, despite the terror. We will, of course, do it together, but this is what Nietzsche is talking about. As we were talking about when we first introduced Nietzsche, one of the things that Nietzsche wants you to kind of get your head around is what he called the kind of the heroic perspective, a kind of tragic perspective, what he will call in book one, this kind of artistic perspective. And he wants to sort of impress upon you this idea, this kind of postmodern idea, that in and of itself, the earth and human life, it has no objective, metaphysical, or moral meaning. It's real, but in and of itself, it doesn't have meaning. Human beings have to give it meaning. Two, whatever meaning we give it is always going to be fragile. It has to be. It's something we create. It's something we assert as an assertion of power. So we do beautiful things. So we build empires. So we make love. So we create friendships. So we raise families. So we have these classes. We do this to do it. But no matter how powerful our meaning becomes, our knowledges, our technologies, our universities, they're always fragile. At the end of the day, they're existentially fragile because they're human inventions. They're assertions of power kind of asserted and thrust into the abyss and thrust into a world that rejects our ability to master it and domesticate it. And because of that, our meanings are fragile. And throughout life, they're going to be overwhelmed. We're living that moment right now. Our meaning is being shattered right now. A meaning that we thought was objectively true, that would just somehow continue on. That there was something just kind of metaphysically true about liberal democracies. There was just something metaphysically true about who I am. And there's just something kind of metaphysically true about a kind of post-industrial informational capitalism supported by social welfare democracies. We just thought that was all true. And that there was somehow some objective necessity that was going to bear all that along. As Locke said, we're rational and progressive. Right? Somehow mind is moving in this upward and linear way, ever more to the moral truth. And now here we are, and that's been shattered. And Nietzsche says, of course it was shattered. It was shattered because you have believed in a truth that didn't exist. You have allowed yourself to believe in something that doesn't exist, and you've committed your life to it. And what you thought was true was an invention. It was, again, important to be sure. And now it's been shattered. COVID-19 is shattering the meaning of our knowledge. It's shattering the value of our highest values. Here we are. So now we must prepare ourselves to begin the process of one, emotionally bearing through what we are existing, what we are experiencing, and two, preparing ourselves for the possibility of creating new meaning. And so the third of the postmodern sort of themes, how do we begin the process of giving our life meaning, value, and purpose? when we come to know that God is dead. God is dead for Nietzsche. COVID-19 is shattering the metaphysical dream, the myth that we have knowledge of truth, that we take that knowledge and we apply it to the world, to master the world and live and be healthy, shattering all of that. COVID-19 is our God is dead moment. Not just God in the Christian sense, but God, capitalism. They are spending $1 trillion every day. The Federal Reserve is printing $1 trillion. It's just inventing it. And it's injecting that $1 trillion into the financial institutions and major corporations every day. And it's committed to do so until it doesn't have to do it anymore. It is inventing value, literally, in a hope to keep the whole damn thing from collapsing into nothingness. Imagine. It's where we are. And so Nietzsche says we must become strong because these events are going to happen to human beings. And we must survive them emotionally. And then we must prepare to reimagine meaning. Do you and I have the strength to recreate, reinvent meaning for our lives, the value of our lives, the purposes of all of our lives? This is our moment in history. This is what we are being called to do right now. Make no mistake about it. And so Nietzsche writes on page 20, section 6, what's the goal now? Now what do we do? God is dead. What do we do? And he says, no joke, let us articulate this new demand. We need a critique of moral values. The value of these values themselves must first be called into question. And for that, there is needed a knowledge of the conditions and circumstances in which they grew, under which they evolved and changed. Page 21, section 7. The project now. What's the project now? What is ahead of us now? And I mean you and I mean next week. What is ahead of us now? What is our project? And Nietzsche writes, the project is to traverse with quite new questions. New questions. And as though with new eyes. And you and I have to have new eyes. We have to have new ideas. We have to have new ways of seeing things, of conceiving of what has meaning, of what has value, and why, and what its purposes are. With new eyes, the enormous, distant, and so well hidden land of a new beginning. He calls it a new morality, of morality that has actually existed, actually been lived. And does this not mean virtually to discover this for the first time? And then ultimately, idealistically, all of this leads at the highest levels, rarefied levels, to the possibility that we become content in the meaning we've given to our lives and the value that we've given to our lives. And on the page, bottom of page 17, Nietzsche writes, until at length, and he was talking about doing this, Nietzsche was talking about doing this. And the goal, he said, what's the goal? He said, and at length, he said, until at length I had a country of my own, a soil of my own, an entire discrete, thriving, flourishing world, like a secret garden, the existence of which no one suspected. That's the goal. Cultivate that garden of ideas and meanings and values, and to affirm it and celebrate it. Not because God willed it, not because Kant declared it, but because you and I created it. All right. I hope you guys are all still there. I haven't heard anything from you guys.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay.
We're here.
Okay. Love you guys very much.
Yeah.
Professor, if we have any questions, I was wondering.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep.
Oh.
Go ahead.
So is Nietzsche really more alike to Mills than we thought? Because they're both saying, even though you explore, you have to find your own way. However, Nietzsche is saying that you have to tear down everything down.
Yep. Yep.
But Nietzsche kind of looks upon and says, oh, I think that everything that has been made needs to be looked once more. Meanwhile, Mills is just saying, find yourself.
Well, Nietzsche is saying these things need to be created.
Okay.
They can't be discovered. So Mill and Nietzsche are quite far apart.
Wow.
Nietzsche is arguing, and I got to go because I know there's class here. Nietzsche's arguing that doing what Mill says to do is going to make you a slave.
Okay. So that's the difference.
Yep.
Got it. So for Nietzsche, there's no freedom.
There is freedom, but there's only freedom once you become aware that God is dead and you begin the process of disentangling yourself from moral ideas and become inventive and creative in the giving to your life meaning and value.
Is it that part where he says, must we ourselves not become God simply to appear worthy of it?
Yeah. Yeah. He's making a joke about that.
Okay, so it's not as in him literally saying we'd have to find the dignity. Okay, now I get it.
The dignity, if you wanted to, if Nietzsche wanted to play with the using the words like God, the dignity is becoming our own God.
Okay, got it. Now I see.
All right, you guys, amazing.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor.
Yep.
Thank you.
Next, we don't have class on Tuesday. Next Thursday, we start the first essay.